You put what you want to. But I get nervous talking.
This is Connie Mason, and I'm interviewing Danny Styron on February the 8th, 2011. And we're here at the Coruscant Waterfowl Museum. And thank you, Danny, for coming in this morning.
Well, thank you.
First of all, let's just get some background material. What's your mom and daddy's names? My father was Eugene Styron, Daniel Eugene Styron, Sr. of Cedar Island. My mother was Beulah Pauline Daniels, which wound up being a Styron, of course, when they got married. Mm-hmm. And both of them were native Cedar Islanders, grew up on Cedar Island. I guess they knew each other growing up. Yeah, they knew each other. They only lived like 300 yards from one another. Where do they live on the island? Well, if you remember where Hubbard Styron's store was, if you go about 30 yards towards the Methodist Church or the ferry, mm-hmm. Mama lived there on the right. Her father was one of those rural mail carriers, and I can remember him carrying the mail by horse and cart. No kidding. At that time, there were two parts of Cedar Island. I lived in what was called Row, mm-hmm. and down by where the wildlife tower was Lola. And my grandfather would take and carry the mail every day from Cedar Island to Lola, and a mailboat would come out of Atlantic and stop off of Lola, and somebody would pull out and get the mail, and they'd bring it, and then he would bring it back up the road. Well, did the mailboat come into where that wildlife ramp is now? No. What she did, she would go off in Coruscant, and there's some shallow water going out to it, mm-hmm. and somebody would take a 16-foot skiff, because most of them didn't have motors in it, and they'd pull out and get the mail. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm sure it was somebody who was on contract or something, because the mail, they wouldn't. My grandfather had to have a contract to do what he did. Right. But they would bring it ashore, and then they'd take it to the post office in Lola. And then... where was the Lola post office? When you head down towards the wildlife tower, let me get to you easier. When you leave where the wildlife tower was, you come back and you come around that 90-degree turn and head back towards Cedar Island. Mm-hmm. The next sharp curve, the post office there. Now, there are probably people who ran it before I knew, but Miss Mattie Emmer Daniels, Woodrow Daniels' wife, was the postmaster when I was there. Mm-hmm. Well, I remember. Was it on the right-hand side of the road or left-hand? On the right-hand side, as you're coming back to Cedar Island? Coming back towards Cedar Island, yeah. How about that? And so he would pick it up and deliver it by cart, horse and cart? Horse and cart, yeah. And once in a while, he'd let me and my first cousin, Marcel, we could ride down with him in the horse and cart. They weren't as many rules and mess back then as they are now. Yeah. Well, did he deliver them right to the house? Or they didn't have No, what they did, they had a post office at on the road, which was Cedar Island. And the postmaster, I remember, the first one I remember was Miss Janet Daniels, John Morris's wife. And John Morris owned where East Carteret Corner is now. Mm-hmm. He had a grocery store there back in the 30s and 40s. What's the store that's right across from where those people have the horses now? Seems like there's an abandoned store. That was Hubbard Styron's store. That's the one that was right before where my grandfather was. Okay. At one time there were 7 stores on Cedar Island. Wow. Did they specialize, or were they just all general? No. What they did, like down in Lola, Mr. Joe Smith, and he had a store down right on Coruscant. And as you're going toward the wildlife ramp, would it be on? When you head towards the wildlife ramp, instead of turning right, go to Lewis's Creek, there used to be a dirt road running around there, and there were several and many houses down there. Okay. And Joe Smith had a store there, and then Mr. Norwood and Beatrice had one, and they had theirs up there by the Baptist Church down the bay. They were Lupton, Beatrice and Norwood Lupton. And then Uncle Monroe had one, which was right before Hubbard's. So right where Kenneth and them's got the harbor now. And then Hubbard had one. My grandfather Billy had one. Like was right here, and John Morris had one over there. So that's 7. Dora Day had one, was 8, and Milda Goodwin had one, was 9. So there were actually 9 stores on Cedar Island.
And I guess it was just local community stores.
Local community stores, and if you needed something, you could go there and get it. And
I guess walking distance was the criteria for
growing up
how far
back then. Anything was walking distance. I mean, to walk down to Lola, down to them places, that weren't too big a deal because 98% of the people were in the same boat walking inside they got there. And they probably weren't over 2 or 3 cars on the whole island.
Well, let me go back to your family just a minute. How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I had 4 brothers and no sisters.
And what were your brothers' names?
Well, I'm the oldest. I got a brother named Bradley Styron, which owns Quality Seafood at Cedar Island. I got a brother, David Styron, which is retired now. I got another brother, which passed away, Timothy Styron.
And so Bradley's in the seafood, and what's David do?
David is retired. He worked on dredge boats, worked with the state on the dredge and everything. He's retired now.
Growing up on Cedar Island, I guess the Causeway was already built, or not?
Well, the Causeway I remember was dirt paths when I was a little boy.
Dirt paths.
The dirt roads is what we had. And back in the 50s, there weren't even phone service. If you needed to make a phone call, you went to Atlantic to use the phone. And I was real young, and I just barely remember when the power came on Cedar Island. Everything was done by lamps and kerosene. When you had hurricanes come through, that was the greatest event ever happened. Number 1, we got out of school, which everybody liked. Number 2, the stores didn't have generator stuff in, so as the ice cream started getting soft, they'd call you to come down and you get free ice cream and stuff. I mean, as a young boy, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12-year-old, you were thinking about A, getting out of school, B, getting that free ice cream. You weren't thinking about the damages that occurred.
Tell me, do you mind telling me how old you are now?
I'm 7 years younger than you are. No, seriously, I'm 64-year-old.
Okay.
Or will be March the 19th.
That'll just help put in perspective what you're remembering.
Yeah.
So, well, that's great. That's great. The Causeway that's there now, so you remember them building that there.
I faintly remember it, and I don't remember all of it, but the shells that's on the highway between Cedar Island and Atlantic come from Hog Island. They used to have oyster shucking houses in a lot of them places. They had one down to the end of the road at Lola, and they had a lot of shells there, and a lot of the women did that. But the shells were bought over by boat and barges and stuff, and they're put on the Cedar Island Road. And they claim they took them off of Indian mines, but now I can't go back far enough to say yes or no.
Well, that happened here on Harker's Island that way, so. It's very probable.
You wouldn't do that today with the laws we got.
No. Those are historic now. You couldn't do that. You talked about Monroe, one of your relatives. Is that Monroe Gaskell?
Monroe Gaskell, yes.
Now, the bridge is named for him. Tell me about him.
Well, my Uncle Monroe was, there were 3, well, there were 4 of them brothers. Webb Gaskell from Beaufort, if you ever heard of him. Webb kind of liked to stretch the truth. Uncle Monroe was pretty much what you see is what you got. Then Tom Gaskell, that was Jerry Gaskell's daddy. And then Luther Gaskell was Russell and Bill Dick and Callis and all that bunch. Callis used to be patrolman in Beaufort. But anyway.
How do you spell Callis? Do you know?
C-A-L-L.
U-S?
I think so.
I've never heard that as a name.
He was also a Korean veteran too. Okay. Veteran of Korea. And Uncle Monroe got hooked up with a bunch of people, R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company.
Oh.
I mean, way back in the 50s. And they had a place on Hog Island that R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company owned.
On Hog Island?
On Hog Island.
Wow.
There was an eastern end and a western end of Hog Island. They were on the eastern end, the side the closest to the ocean. And a lot of prominent citizens came from upstate to come down to Cedar Island to go hunting and fishing at Hog Island. So just to give you an example, one that really sticks in my mind because in 1964, 63 or 64, the St. Louis Cardinals won the World Series. They had a fellow named Dick Grote that played shortstop for them. He was a graduate of Duke University. And, you know, here I am, 17-year-old, done very little traveling, so, you know, I thought Carteret County was a big place. I didn't realize there was a big state and a big nation and a big world out there. But anyway, Dick Grote came down, and I got to meet Dick Grote. Now, that was a big deal for me, a young boy growing up on Cedar Island. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was nothing to him. But then, you know, a lot of other prominent people came down there. There was, what's that fellow that highway's named after between Durham and Greensboro? I can't remember.
Was it a politician?
Yeah.
Gee whiz.
Buck Dean Freeway.
Okay.
All right, Buck Dean was with, Buck Dean was head of the Department of Transportation. This was back around 60 or 61. If you remember, the ferry used to be located in Atlantic, North Carolina.
No, I don't remember that.
The ferry was actually located in Atlantic, North Carolina at D. Mason's store, which if you go toward the present fire department is and head east, it's about 50 yards on the right. D. Mason had a store there, and the ferry used to tie up there. Well, back in the 60s, my Uncle Winfield was real instrumental. He's the one that dug the big harbor on Cedar Island. He wanted the ferry to come to Cedar Island. Well, Uncle Monroe wanted to come to Cedar Island. Well, Clayton Jr. had the motel, which was Daddy, old man Clayton. They had the motel. They had, I think, 8 rooms in and a restaurant. And
where was that located?
That's the present-day Driftwood Motel.
Okay.
Okay, and Buck Dean came down. Now, keep in mind, he's the Secretary of Department of Transportation in Raleigh. So he started talking to them, and he said, what do you want? They said, we want the ferry to Cedar Island, move to Cedar Island. This was done around a card table on Hog Island. And they decided that night that the ferry was actually going to move to Cedar Island. And, you know, back then, they weren't very few people had influence. Uncle Monroe had a lot of influence in Raleigh. Billy Smith had a lot of influence in Raleigh, and Clayton Jr. Then, and later in life, Eugene Willis, when Bob Scott was governor, had a lot of influence in Raleigh. So there was people down the east that could touch people and everything, and there was governors and people like that would come down and see them.
Elmer Willis.
Yeah, Elmer Willis, yeah. But I mean, like I say, there was a lot of people that could do some things. I remember one time they weren't going to open shrimping, and Uncle Monroe went to Raleigh, and when he come back that evening, he told everybody to get right to go shrimping. They went shrimping at midnight that night.
How about it?
So, I mean, you know, that's how things were done back then, but I mean, you ain't going to get nobody to do nothing like that now, but even in these small communities with 250, 300, 400 people, they had ways of doing things.
They had an advocate.
Right, and most of the time, the store owners were the ones that had most of the money.
And Monroe had a store.
Monroe had a store, yeah.
And where was his store again?
Right before Hubbard's. It was about 30, 40 yards down the road from Hubbard's.
Okay.
You know where the main cemetery is on Cedar Island?
Mm-hmm.
If you left that and headed to the ferry office, go around that curve, mm-hmm. It was right down to the right where they got a harbor now, Kenneth and Howard and them do.
Okay. And speaking of the harbor, there's a harbor. That's a harbor of refuge now. Is that what the county has set it all for?
I'm not sure that the county can do that. I think the only way they'd have a harbor of refuge is where the fish house is, because my Uncle Winfield owned it and he sold it to somebody, and I'm not sure how that goes.
Right. Okay.
Because I don't really know the inner workings of that.
Right.
If I did, I'd tell you.
Let's go back to Lola a minute. I'm real impressed with that cemetery down there with the church.
Which cemetery?
Well, the one with the wooden markers in it.
Well, hold on now. There's about 7 or 8 cemeteries in Lola with wooden markers.
Yeah.
There's a trailer right beside it before you get there.
Oh, so I didn't even, either I didn't see it or.
All right, when you head down to Lola, you'll come to a house. When you go past that, you'll come to 1 or 2 trailers. If you look to your left, there's a cemetery right there.
Okay.
After you pass the church on the right, there's a road that used to go out in the woods.
And
there's
it's
a
blocked
cemetery
off.
out there.
Okay. Is anybody still buried in there? I mean, are they still burying people in there?
No, I don't think
it's
so.
Not active.
And when you go on down to where you turn right, go to Lola and go to Lewis's Creek, there was a cemetery down there. And
on the right?
On the left.
On the left.
And let me think his name. Jim Downing.
Jim Downing.
He was a black man. He lived down there, him and his wife. They were real nice people. Mm-hmm. And he always kept the cemetery clean. But back to the one by the church. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I was real impressed with the numbers of wooden markers still there. And in fact, we had a researcher from Iowa looking for wooden markers. And I said, well, that was the only one that I knew. I took pictures of, and he was thrilled to death.
You got Kim folks buried in one full of wooden markers.
Wow. The one at Stacy?
Yeah.
It's got wooden
all
markers?
that in. Oh. It's got wooden markers.
Well, see, I guess I didn't trek back there.
But sometime when you're at Cedar Island, get up. I'll tell you who'd be a good one. Donald Styron or Paul Smith. Get them to take you to Hog Island. And you talk about wooden markers. There are lots of wooden markers over there.
And who was that other one? Donald Styron and who?
Donald Styron and Paul Smith.
Paul Smith.
And I'll tell you another one. Your buddy Jack Goodwin knows a lot about it. But you can spend a whole day on both ends of Hog Island in the summertime when it's long days, and you could go to a lot of cemeteries that you didn't realize.
Really?
I mean, there's a lot of cemeteries up there.
Really?
And probably Donald knows where they're at probably as good as anybody.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's really interesting. And Hog Island, I mean, I had been led to believe that it was pretty much underwater now. Is it not? No?
There's some water there, but it's not underwater.
Okay.
Hog Island, Melvin Robinson wrote a book. You know what I'm going
The Core Sounder?
No, Melvin Robinson wrote a book, The Riddle of the Lost Colony.
Oh, that one. Okay, yeah.
And in Riddle of the Lost Colony, he claims that Hog Island was the first permanent English settlement. He said in the book, and I'm quoting off of my mind, and I might not be 100% correct, but it says something like they came into a deep inlet, they turned south and sailed 20 leagues. And whatever the league is, it worked out that was about the distance it would have been to go to Hog Island. And they talked about it and everything. And at one time, there was a lot of Indians on Cedar Island. I mean, not just on Hog Island, except there were some on Cedar Island, and there's some over in the woods they call the western part of it. Over in the woods coming on Cedar Island on the left, there were some there.
Wasn't there an archaeologist named Dr. Coe that went over there a lot and did a lot of unofficial excavations, I guess I can say.
I don't know what he done. I'm not going to go into that. But he did something.
Now, it was my understanding, and of course, I know this is not your time period or anything, but if you have anything to add to it, I had heard that a lot of the men that had settled on Shackelford got their wives from Cedar Island.
Well,
Indian wives.
I know that growing up as a young boy, that a lot of people to Cedar Island wound up being kin to a lot of people to Lennoxville.
Okay. In Beaufort.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. We talked about storms. One of my favorite storm stories to Cedar Island was about this hurricane. They had this couple, and I don't know any names, had a baby, and it blew all the windows out, but they had stuffed the windows with the feather pillows. And because the tide came in, it spoiled all the wells and all their water, fresh water. But they squeezed the water out of those feather pillows that they used to stuff the windows to get the fresh water out of it for that baby.
That might be true. And I'm not sure if it's the right person, but I think Neil Daniels was born somewhere right around that, and it seemed like to me his name was mentioned, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
And I do know where Neil Daniels lived, and across the road, Uncle Sam, up where the Primitive Baptist Church is, that they had their boat tied to the front visor post of Uncle Sam's house, and they had to come out of the house and get in the boat, and the boat went above the front porch. Now, how much more water came up, I don't know.
And it seems like they didn't have as much problem recovering from a storm that we do today.
Well, let me tell you something. There's more in this cubicle right here than there probably was in a whole house. Most of them had like a bed. They may have had 2 or 3 cabinets in the kitchen, and they had a bed in each room. And most of them, in the early years, there weren't no TV. Some of them had radios and stuff. So there wasn't a lot to do. And you got to remember, the houses were made cheap back in. By that, let me tell you what I mean. I mean, we didn't have the insulation and all the stuff we got now. And most of them were made with boards, and there were cracks in some of them. And a lot of times, after the tide came in the house, people would drill holes in their floor. They'd go out with buckets of water, and they'd wash it out. And we may have mildew problems back then. We could have mold problems, but nobody didn't know it. And people lived to be a ripe old age. I got an uncle, or I reckon he's my uncle. They always said Uncle Cicero. He was a captain of tugboats and stuff, and he lived to be 92, 93-year-old. And they talk about pork, how pork will kill you. He would kill 3 or 4 hogs every year. When he cooked a pot of collars, they were an inch and a half of grease on top of the pot. Well, now, had he not done that, he might still be alive.
At 90.
Yeah.
Well.
And there's Worth Harris on Cedar Island right now. He's 94, 95, 96-year-old. He goes oystering and everything. So, you know, some of these things that we talk about as problems that kill people, maybe the problems is more in helping sell something or somebody getting a job than it is in somebody's health and well-being.
Right. And our lifestyle has changed, too.
Well, yeah, nobody didn't have cars in now.
Now,
if you got I'll give you my house for an example. I got just me and Lyda now lives there. We got 1, 2, 4 vehicles in the yard, and the most we can drive at any time is her drive one and me drive one. One of my daughters, her and her husband and 1 granddaughter, has got license. There's 4 vehicles in her yard. My other daughter, two licensed drivers, 3 vehicles. My other daughter, 2 licensed drivers, 3 vehicles. So yes, I think, and I'm talking more about myself because I don't want to put a lot of people in it because somebody's liable to say, well, you're stupid, and I probably am. But no. I know that I myself am above the raising I came up with. Had I been the caliber of person that saved like my grandfather did, I would have probably $1 and maybe $1.5 or $2 million in a bank somewhere. And now I ain't got enough in the bank to buy a tank of gas. So, I mean, that shows you, you know, that, and I just use myself as that.
Sure. So, we didn't talk about your immediate family. You married Lyda Hamilton.
Yeah.
And you've got 3 beautiful girls.
I think so.
And they're all married and gave you some grandchildren.
Yeah, all except Rose. All she's got is dogs and cats.
Well, that's pretty good, though.
Wendy's got 2 girls. One of them's turned 16 this year. The other one's 13. And Landon, he's 13.
Mm-hmm. And
he's a boy that your daddy would be proud of.
Oh yeah.
He's played baseball, basketball, likes to get in trouble, and he's in the 7th grade and got a girlfriend now, so your daddy's going to be proud of him.
Oh, absolutely. It just he's got a boy.
Yeah.
He's got a boy. When you talk to your kids about growing up on Cedar Island, what kind of things do you like to stress to them?
Well, let me tell you what I did, and you can slice this pie any way you want to and make up your own opinion, or anybody else can. I was in the service, and I'm going to say somewhere in my 20s.
Coast Guard.
And my daughter said, when I come home, say, Daddy, we want some money, we want this, or we got this and this to do in a couple of weeks. And I had a boat, and I had nets. I said, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll set them nets. So I set them nets, and they would let me get enough to pay for my gas. And they would split the money 3 ways. So I was teaching them heritage and everything. And also, I was trying to teach them that if you want something, you got to work for it. And all 3 of them turned out rather well. They all got good jobs and making good money. They all went to college, of course. Mm-hmm. But I tried to teach them lessons that I had learned through life. Mm-hmm. I was probably a better teacher than I was a student, because I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to what I said, doing things myself. Mm-hmm. But they did pretty good on it. And, every one of my daughters enjoyed going to Cedar Island. Matter of fact, I got a 16-year-old granddaughter that probably stays at Cedar Island 35, 40 days or more out of the year. She works at a driftwood, and she always winds up, when she goes to work on a Friday night or a Saturday night, she winds up saying, well, I'm going to stay with this one or that one. And I mean, and she'll stay over there, and she just enjoys it. So they're getting into the heritage and the history part of it and everything. And
what was your first job? I mean, to make money, was it fishing?
My first job, I didn't make no money.
Well, okay.
I was probably 5 or 6 years old, and my father said, "You're going to go fishing with me." I mean, he didn't say, "Do you want to go? Would you like to go make some money?" And I remember a lot of weeks back in the 50s with my father, and people will probably laugh today at this. $2 a half, $3, $4, $5 was a big week's work. And I remember one year in particular, he made $3,600 that year. He thought he was the richest man he's ever been. That was somewhere in the early 60s and stuff. But now there were good times we had fishing too. I mean, there were times we would make $200, $300, $400. Well, my father mostly set pine nets and stuff, and we'd catch butterfish and mackerel and trout. And then in later years, he liked to experiment with things. So he said, I'm going to fix a net to put in the West Bay. We'll catch him croakers and spots. Well, he was halfway right. He fixed a net to catch him croakers. She was small marsh. She was small marsh from the shore right on out. I mean, it was like running in a wall. You had to go offshore. And I'll never forget, the first morning we went to that net, she had 35 pound of croakers. And I said, all the work we've done, if this is how we're going to make our money, we're in trouble. Well, the wind shifted, and 2 or 3 days later, we went to that same net and took 2,000 pounds of croakers out of her, and they were 10 cents a pound. That was $200. That was unheard of money. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So then later years, I started getting paid, and what I did, I put my money up. No, let me rephrase that. I didn't put my money up. Mama put my money up, and I would get a certain amount of it. Mm-hmm. And that's the way most of the boys on there did. And the boys even bought their clothes and stuff for going to school, because as you got older in school, you didn't kind of like what your mama got. You want to get something like everybody else had. So we did that, and I worked with my father, and then he got setting shad nets in Pamlico Sound. That's the worst job man ever had. You got there after them gales, you got loons, you got fishing ducks. Yes, you got some fish and stuff in the nets, and the seas are breaking over and you're getting wet all over. One morning, I got so wet and cold, we went ashore, and we set it, fixed us a place, and we dried out our clothes right there and went back. And I didn't tell him, but I said, if I can do this, I can do something else. And on my 18th birthday, me and a friend of mine got out of school, skipped school, whatever you want to say, around 11 o'clock. went to Moorhead, and I joined the Coast Guard. And when I told Daddy, he weren't a happy camper. He said, I've just got you to the age where you can be a help to me and everything.
Strong.
He said, and you're leaving. But at that time in the early 60s, the mid 60s and stuff, at the early part of it, there were probably 25 or 30 shrimp boats on Cedar Island. In the late 50s and early 60s, it got down to where there were only two. The fishing, the crabbing, and everything started going down. So I personally felt like I made a wise choice, and I guess the Lord blessed me in this part of it. It was still not too good in 69, so I signed over for 6 more years in the Coast Guard. Well, that put me obligated for 10 years. Well, in the 70s, people started making big money of crabbing and fishing and everything, and I thought I'd made a bad decision. But I guess I'm doing as good today as I would have been, and I might not have been here today.
Absolutely. Let me flip this over. I want to go back to who'd you sell your fish to?
At that time, we sold our fish to Clayton Fulcher Seafood. They had a fish house on Cedar Island. And Tillman Taylor put a fish house over there. He had one too.
Now, did you take the fish there, or did they have a
No, they had a, you come into a dock and they had everything there, and you offload your stuff there. They would weigh it, and they would give you a ticket saying you had this many, or whatever. And on Friday afternoon, most times Saturday morning, they pay you. And the thing back then, they always paid you in cash. There wasn't no such thing as checks. Well, start with most of the business wouldn't have enough money to cash a bunch of checks. So,
now my father was in long haul.
Yeah.
And he was telling me that there were different names for different hauls.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah. They had different names for different hauls and everything. And depending on how many haulers they were, they would get together on Saturday, and if there were 5 haulers, each one would get one of the top 5 places. Then each one would get one of the, what they considered the second 5. And everybody would, that's how they get to go.
Would they draw lots or something? Or?
It was basically, that's what they did. They got together and they would put like 5 names in a hat, and you draw them out. Sometimes you could do good, sometimes you wouldn't, but nobody really knew where the fish was going to be.
Right. What are some of the names? Do you remember any of the names of the
Well, they had Catherine and Jane. They had one off of Davis named Benny's Pine. They had Nelson Bay. They had between sea level. They had that one to Hall. They had Hall's Point. And then they had one Rich Bay. Then they had the Thoroughfare. Then they had what was that other one up there? But I'll go on down. Then they had the Penalties down by Portsmouth, and then they had Brown Island Shoal, Swan Island, Raccoon Island, and they had places through the marshes they would go and everything. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there was plenty of places to go.
Right.
And some of them liked certain places better, but everybody had a place to go.
Right. Well, good. That sounds.
And oystering was predominant back then too. I mean, there was a lot of oysters around and everything. As a young boy, probably 10 to 12 years old, I can remember when they opened oysters that they'd go in the back bay and they'd send a boat over. Leo Henry's from Messick was one of the fellas, and they had another one would come from Swankwater, and they'd get 400 or 500 bushels of oysters a day from local people oystering. Yeah. And back then you got $2. $2.25 a tub. That's 5 pecks, not 4 pecks.
Were they basically hand oystering, or were they dredging?
Well, some of them used tongs and some of them used rakes. They never used
dredging.
And well, now some people may have done it, but they weren't supposed to.
Okay. And was there a shucking house on Cedar Island?
There was a shucking house on Cedar Island at Lola. Like I said, in earlier years, there were one on Hog Island.
Okay. I've got to go to Hog Island.
And I remember in the spring of the year, they would plant oysters. They'd go to Portsmouth Island, and they'd take them rocks of oysters, and most people would take 2 boats, and they'd give you like 150 bushels of oysters. You get credit for them, depending on how many you had, and you got 75 cents a bushel to bring in oysters back. I remember many a Saturday morning getting up at 2 o'clock, going to Portsmouth, oyster all day, and get back home at dark or shortly after night. That was in the spring of the year.
That was hard work.
I remember as a young boy getting up 4 and 4:30 in the morning, going fishing with my father, come home, take a shower, get cleaned up, and eat and go to school. Come home evenings, you always had to cut firewood or work on nets or there was always something you had to do.
Did you do a lot of hunting?
I did a lot of hunting.
Yeah.
My father carried me hunting. I mean, from the time I was probably 11-year-old and stuff, I did a lot of hunting with him.
What was your favorite bird?
Well,
or the most prolific?
Well, my father had a couple friends that owned the clubhouse on the other side, the Smith boys, John Smith, Lionel, and all them, and Rosa. There were 4 or 5 of them owned it, and Daddy got hooked up with them. And back then, we would feed birds. We would, if we had 2 blinds, we'd put a 100-pound bag of corn each blind of nights, and then about 2-3 times a week we'd go shoot them. And I love to shoot geese. And I love to shoot pintails. I mean, because pintails was a challenge.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because just as soon if you shot him on the water, from the time he left that water till he got 50, 60 foot in the air, he was fast. Not many people could kill one that first 50 or 60 foot. Once he leveled off, you had a chance on him.
Wow.
But I enjoyed doing that.
I hadn't heard that before. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Did you sell the birds that you shot, or did you eat them? Or?
Well, back then, when I was a real young boy, my father used to, around shortly after Thanksgiving, he would start going hunting. He'd come home sometimes with 25 or 30 geese and a bunch of ducks, and we'd pick them geese. The ones that was picked and dressed, we had a clothesline. Mama would hang clothes on, but when the geese was ready, we'd hang them geese on a clothesline. And people from different areas would come. If they got one that was dressed, it was $3. If they got one undressed, it was $2.
How about that?
And that was back somewhere in the 50s.
Mm. Did you ever take any photographs, or did anybody ever have a camera that took photographs of some of this?
Them fellows were kind of scared of what they were doing, and a lot of people were doing it. And I don't think there were no pictures taken of any geese hanging on clotheslines. They could have been. They might still be some out there, but I'm not sure where they're at.
Okay.
But there is a lot of people around that can remember seeing them.
Right. Did you ever hear tell my Daddy told me one time something that Granddaddy built, and I do know existed because I went to Hatteras, and this older gentleman started telling the same story, and I just about came out of my skin because I said, my Daddy told me that, and I hadn't had anybody to confirm it. But Granddaddy built this like a flagpole, and it had with an endless line on it, and attached to the line was a board that had nails in it, and he would dress out a fish and put them on the nails and hoist it up in the air to dry it.
And they did that. They would do that, and also in later years, but they wouldn't put them on the nails. They do the same thing with mullet rope.
Oh, really?
And what they do, they put like a net screen also over it so that the birds couldn't get in them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember as a young boy seeing fish hung up drying out like that.
Well, and Daddy said that he said they hung them above the fly line.
Yeah. Now, I don't know what a fly line was.
I don't either, but...
And they weren't talking about planes.
No. No, they weren't. But when this man from Hatteras, he actually drew me a picture of it. You know, I was just so happy to see it because it was after Daddy.
Have you still got the picture?
I do. I'll be happy to bring it to you and show it to you. In fact, I'll give you a copy of it because the more people have it, the better. So if you're growing up on Cedar Island, what was a typical breakfast for you? Was there breakfast?
Well, now, they eat pretty good. I mean, you'd have, well, it depends on the time of year. When you killed hogs and stuff, you had a lot of pork. The rest of the time, you might eat, sometimes it might be bologna and eggs, sometimes it might be bacon or sausage and eggs or pancakes. And, but I don't remember much French toast when I was young. But I do remember those other things. And you had a lot of fried potatoes and grits and oatmeal, stuff like that. I mean, traditionally the same things you eat now.
Do you remember any windmills to Cedar Island?
No, I don't.
You ever heard any stories about any windmills?
I heard there were some at one time when everybody was a long time before I came around.
Right. Did you have plenty of coffee? I mean, did you ever have to drink Postum or Yopon tea?
My grandfather, the one that ran the mill, that's all he drank was Postum.
Oh, okay.
That's all, he could have got something else, but there was always coffee. You got to remember now, I was born in 47, come in the 50s and 60s, so that wasn't really a real big problem back then. Now, before that, it was.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen, actually, when I was growing up, I did see Postum in the grocery stores, but I never had the nerve to buy any.
I think Postum was similar to what decaf coffee is now. I'm not sure.
It's made out of wheat, I think,
yeah.
And I had somebody tell me it was nasty stuff, but I don't know.
Well, I don't know. When you're going to convince my grandfather that, he'd take him a piece of that cheese about that big, probably about an inch by a half an inch, and he would be dipping that cheese in that coffee. Well, there was the grease running in the coffee or the Postum, and he'd drink it. So
he's happy.
I never heard him complaining about it.
There
but he could have got something else.
So did holidays on Cedar Island? What was Christmas like?
Christmas was pretty good. Everybody would go visit everybody and spend some time with your family and friends. The 4th of July and Labor Day, we would have horse spinnings. I mean, that went on for years and years. They had a lot of horses over there. On Cedar Island? Yeah. There's still some, one or two, I don't know how many left. They came on there and killed some horses. The NC State crowd did. They had some type of disease or something.
The encephalitis.
Yeah, but they left 2 of them. And they said that they were all right. So there's still some horses there. He's got ancestors in them. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you the truth. I'm glad my father was in the cemetery when they killed them horses, because he would have probably been in prison. Because he wouldn't have gone along with that.
Right.
And I never felt to the day that they did the right thing, because the horses are running on land that people own. Not no government land, not no state land. It was landowners' horses, landowners' horses and landowners' land, and nobody objected to it. So I just felt like they did the wrong thing. I mean, if I own a piece of land, I ought to be able to have horses or not have horses.
Right.
But I understand about the people that had horses. But if they rode their horses on their own land instead of, me and my brothers owned like 157 acres of land over there. We never objected to nobody using it. My mother and father before me didn't. And, it was just in my opinion, it was something that was done wrong.
Did you ever go over, I know you did, go to Core Banks where they're...
Yeah. As a young boy, I used to go over to Core Banks, and you would take a barge. Someone went they had a barge that they take across there, and the people that bought horses, they bring horses back on that. Someone went in their work boats, and they went all different ways. And they would send the crew up on the north end to Drum Inlet, and they would pin them from like Portsmouth or however far they could get all the way back to where that pin was at Drum Inlet. Now, the later on they pin them on the other end. That's the way I remember it. I mean, they never got them both pinned at the same time because of the inlet problem.
Oh yeah. And of course they had to blow open Drum Inlet eventually.
That was the new Drum Inlet.
Yeah, the new Drum Inlet. And there were some other inlets. Do you remember any of the other inlets being open?
Yeah, there was Catherine and Jane was open back in.
Catherine Jane was an inlet.
Yeah. The Swash, they had a Swash inlet that stayed open pretty good. And then they had Daniel Swash. And that didn't stay open very well. And then they had, I don't remember anymore going down there.
It seems like there was a whalebone, or not whalebone, but whalehead or something.
Yeah, that was down by the Evergreens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was closer to Portsmouth.
Yeah.
Did you do any specific? I mean, did you do any soft crabbing over there?
Well, I didn't really get into that too much, but there was a lot of people made good money at soft crabbing and stuff. And the people on Cedar Island weren't really into soft crabbing because the spring of the year there were other things they could do. And in the late winter and early spring when it come time, they could oyster on up till about the 15th of April, and they always had an outlet for their oysters. Mm-hmm. And then they would start climbing, or someone would start setting nets and stuff. So they were in a different thing now. When you got around Stacy, Davis, and on down the Sound, people did a lot of peeler crabbing and stuff, mm-hmm. and shedding soft crabs and mm-hmm. stuff. But they didn't get the prices you're getting today.
Right.
If you did, you'd be a well-to-do girl. Because your daddy used to do some of that. You would have had a lot of money in a sock somewhere.
He would have. Louise would have found it, but we digress. Were there any stories about the Thoroughfare and how it was came about?
Well,
do you remember?
I think the Thoroughfare, I've heard stories, but I'd have to stop and think and get them right. I do know that when you leave the Thoroughfare before you get to Cedar Island, that ditch that Little Bridge is on, mm-hmm. they call John Day's Ditch, mm-hmm. that was dug for one horse. Man got one horse to dig at.
Oh my goodness! Wow. And well, I'll just tell you this. Maybe you've heard it. Way back, probably in the 80s, I had heard that Thoroughfare was first a small ditch and had been dug by the Indians.
Yeah.
Had you heard that?
I've heard that, yeah.
And I think what had brought it back to my mind was in the 90s, they had found some canals in Florida that were built by the Indians, mm-hmm. and they didn't think that they did that kind of thing. So I was very interested to
well, I've heard that, but see, I'm not sure if it's like an old wives' tale or if it's true or not. I mean, growing up as a little boy going to the store nights, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, I heard a lot of things, and a lot of things that I heard in later years I realized wasn't the truth. There was more fish caught, more ducks and geese killed around them old stoves in them stores than was actually caught or killed out in the open. I mean, you know,
that's such a great
if
statement.
A person told one, it may not be a tale, could have been fact, the next person's going to add to, and by the time it come around to me or whoever at the end, you had a tale that was way off there.
As Rodney Kemp says, it was a fish house liar.
Yeah, you're right about that. They might have been community store liars. They weren't in a fish house, but they would stretch the truth on a lot of things.
So for entertainment, the stores would be open at night. And
but let me tell you what we do in the afternoon. Okay. In the afternoon, we would, somebody would find enough money, we'd buy one of them rubber balls. And sometimes we'd have 15 or 20 people on each team. We'd play ball right in the center of the highway. Once by every hour or two, a vehicle might come by, but you could play ball right in the center of the road.
Oh, goodness.
You played ball, rode horses, went out fishing, and you know, although it sounds like work, climbing, that was a relaxing thing people done, and we even had a polar bear club on Cedar Island back in the 60s.
Really?
Yeah, Eric Todd Smith. He's dead and gone now. He started a polar bear club. Each person had to pay 15 cents or something like 10 or 15 cents. And you started, it was real warm when you started. Every morning you had to go up to where the present ferry office is. There used to be a pier there, a fishing pier many years ago. Mm-hmm. And you had to plunge in the Pamlico Sound and come out. You had to do that.
And it was 15 cents every time you plunged in?
Yeah, every time you plunged in. And what happened was, and see, we young boys weren't real smart. Whoever the last person was that's plunged got 50% of the money that was involved. So Eric was getting 50% of it.
And he didn't plunge.
And he weren't even plunging. But anyway, we had a fella every year won it. And I mean, I would go, but he was a little bit less stable than I was. And he won it just about every year.
Oh, wow. I had never heard that's
But there were actually a polar bear club over there.
Polar bear club.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. You know, I had heard that we're talking about the ferries. And you've worked for the ferries,
Yeah.
but and maybe you've heard this, but I had heard that Cedar Island was in danger of not, and Carteret County was in danger of not getting the ferry. The last 50 yards or something like that was in contention. You know, that something happened in that last 50 yards between where we come ashore that almost stopped the ferry from coming to Cedar Island. Have you ever heard anything like that?
No, and the fellow that did the dredging for the dig, the present day harbor's been expanded and made bigger, but the fellow actually did he weren't dredging, he used a drag line. And I remember his name was John Anderson. He was the fellow on the drag line, and the reason I remember him is we had a girl in our class named Anderson. I forget her first name, but that's how I remember that he was the one dug it. And he had something like, I don't know what it was. I'm going to say something similar to polio, because I remember one time it got real bad, blowing a gale, and they couldn't get him off of the barge and stuff. And the Marines came from Cherry Point with a helicopter, and they were scared to get close enough to get him off because of that boom on that crane. Well, the Coast Guard came out and they kept working, and finally they got him off. And I remember when they brought him ashore, and I often wonder, did that impact me on joining the Coast Guard? And I really today can't tell you it did or didn't.
It probably impressed you.
Yeah, it did impress me.
Yeah.
It did impress me, but I remember they went there and took him off of her.
Now, in your Coast Guard career, where were you stationed throughout your career?
I started out in Cape May, New Jersey, in boot camp. I left there. I went aboard the Coast Guard cutter Chincoteague in Norfolk, Virginia. I stayed there a year, and I went to a place that not a lot of people don't even realize there was a Coast Guard station. I was stationed at the Coast Guard station in Washington, North Carolina.
Washington, North Carolina.
Right at the foot of the bridge.
Yeah.
If you turned right, go down that street, right on that corner was a Coast Guard station.
Like close, like you're going to Witchard's Beach or something?
No, you're actually crossing that old bridge coming into Washington. And you know down where the waterfront is?
Yeah.
When you turn right, here's the bridge. When you turn right, there was a whole square there. There's a motel or something there now, and there used to be a restaurant there, Fast Brothers.
Yeah.
Because I eat there a lot with Lang Mason when I go on the truck with him. And we were actually stationed there. And I'll tell you why they closed it. They had a fellow that down this street, the third house on the left-hand side of the road, was Mrs. Herbert Bonner's wife, or sister. And she loved to have that Coast Guard station there. Well, Herbert Bonner was on the Merchant Marine Committee and all that. So he told him that wouldn't close. So he died on a Tuesday. They buried him on a Thursday, and they closed the station on a Friday. I know that because we left there and went to Hoboken.
Oh, Hoboken. Now that is some duty now.
That's that. I was over there when Nathan Robinson was a highway patrolman from Atlantic.
Oh, my goodness.
And I left Hoboken, and I went to the Coast Guard cutter McCullough in Wilmington, North Carolina. I left there. I went to Coast Guard Group Cape Hatteras, and a friend of mine was Okeechobee named Wayne Gray. He's now the pro tem or mayor pro tem of Nags Head. And Wayne said, Danny, I'd like to have you down here with me. Will you come down here? He said, you just run the station and I'll take care of 2 or 3 reports. I said, all right. So I wound up going down there with him. Then they wound up in the winter time, they'd send me to Oregon Inlet because I was pretty good at handling boats and getting boats in and out of the inlet.
And that's a dangerous inlet.
That was a dangerous, yeah. And then I wound up back to Ocracoke, and I left Ocracoke and went on to Verbena, or the Moorhead, and I left to Verbena and went on the Coast Guard cutter Northwind out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Wow. And the only way I remember I was up there, we got underway the night the Edmund Fitzgerald sank to search for her.
No kidding.
That's how I remember the year I was up there. I don't remember what year it was, but that's how I remember that. I left there and I went to Oak Island down by Southport. I left Oak Island and went to Islamorada, Florida.
Goodness.
I left Islamorada, Florida, went to Coast Guard headquarters in Washington, D.C., and I left there and went on the West Wind's when I was on in Milwaukee, and went on the North Wind in Wilmington and retired in 85.
Wow. Wow. That was really quite a career.
Yeah, I got to go a lot of places.
You sure did.
I never thought I would go.
How about that?
I've been from the top of the world, north of the North Pole, to south of the South Pole.
Wow. Wow. What a great career. I was going to ask you something about the Coast Guard. Let's see, what was it? Shoot. As they say, the train pulled out of the station, and my thought was not on it. Train of thought.
I'll tell you what they did, and you know, it may have been stupid, but they had a saying when I was in the Coast Guard. You had to go out, but you didn't have to come back. And when I was at Coast Guard headquarters in late 70s in 1980. They changed that motto. They decided that, you know, it weren't good to say, so they didn't put as much stress on people to go out and rescue people as they did before. Right. I mean, if a boat was off there in trouble, you felt like you had to go.
Right, right. Well, and the helicopter changed a lot of things, didn't it?
Helicopter did change a lot of things. Now, let me tell you something. I was stationed in Ocracoke, and when I was stationed over there, we only had 2 nurses on the islands. There were no doctors. And sometimes them nurses would be gone. Well, that left the Coast Guard to kind of do everything, but most of the time there were one of them there. And if a doctor came on the island, a lot of them would let you know where they're staying and everything. Mm-hmm. We actually had a woman have a baby at the Coast Guard station when I was there.
Wow.
We actually had a man that was picked up in the surf, and he was full of water. And we had a doctor come down and see him, and the doctor looked at him. Then he started asking how long it take to get to a hospital and all that. And I'll never forget, that doctor said, if he lives 2 hours, he'll be all right. I said, Doc, ain't nothing you can do. He said, there's no way I can physically get that water out of him. I said, well, I've seen pictures where they bend them over, stuff like that rail, and you hit them on the back. He said, don't believe everything you see. He said, I'm telling you, it can't be done. I mean, I believe if it could, he would have done it. And we had things like that. And I mean, anything that happened, we were doing. And if somebody got killed or something, I remember one time a fellow shot himself, and we wound up taking our vehicle and taking them to the South Docks, and they put them on a Coast Guard boat and carried them to Hatteras. And we worked with the fire departments and everything. So it was a deal that, you know, you weren't just a Coast Guard when you were a part of the community. Mm-hmm. And that was real nice. I'm not sure if they have that same rapport today or not.
Mm-hmm. I remembered my question now. It was about Hobuck, and I had a lady tell me that, and this was before your time, but maybe you heard something while you were there, that John Kennedy, actually, when he was a PT captain, he got sick or something, and they were doing some kind of maneuvers or something. He got sick when he was up there, and they kept him at Hoboken Station for a little bit. Did you ever?
Well, they probably could, because let me tell you something. In 1965, they started a new Coast Guard station at Hoboken. Built, I don't know if it's the present day barracks or not, but I think it is. They built brand new places, and they had a brick building over on the left that used to be the Coast Guard station. Mm-hmm. And it's very possible he stayed there because there were several rooms in that house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it had been during World War II, of course, because
it was there during World War II.
He was
that
a
building was there.
PT captain, and they were doing some kind of maneuvers or something, and he got sick or.
Well, see, they probably would have bought some of them PT boats because the Intercoastal Waterway run right in front of that building. Mm-hmm. So they could have probably bought them in and everything. I mean, because there's a lot of things that could have happened. I don't know.
Right. Well, I really appreciate you coming in today, and I could probably talk to you another 3 or 4 hours. But we'll get this one transcribed, and I'll think of some more questions. And Danny, I knew you'd be a great interview, and you really are. And I've learned a lot today.
I don't know if I'm a great interview. I do the best I can, and I try to remember back things that happened, and I try to give you the facts as I know.
Yeah. Well,
but now, see, some of the facts I gave you that I thought was facts, a lot of that's hearsay, so it may or not be 100%.
Well, we don't say hearsay. We say it's oral tradition.
Well, oral tradition. Okay. Well, that's good. The oral tradition part, we did good.
That's right.
We got that down pat.
Well, I appreciate you coming in, and I'm going to pull out some maps here of Cedar Island. If you just kind of mark some of the places we talked about today on the map, and that'll do us. And I really appreciate it, Danny.
You're certainly welcome. Thank you.